Again, good morning, everyone. Glad that you're all here today. Thank you for joining us as we start our webinar, Gaining and Retaining Event Sponsors. So today we welcome Liz Hack with Griffin Fundraising and Marketing as she shares tips on how you can gain and retain event sponsors. Before we go any further, just want to take a brief moment to review the functionality of our Zoom webinar. Right now, I have everyone on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract you from listening to the presentation. For our discussion today, we will use the chat function to engage with Liz. However, if you do have a specific question, please enter that in the Q&A box. You can access that by clicking the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you see a question that is similar to yours or one that you want to make sure that we get to, you can tap the thumbs up icon to the left of the question. That will move the question to the top of the queue. Given the size of the group today, we are happy to take questions as we go. We also have more time at the end of Liz's presentation to answer any additional questions. For questions that we happen to not get to by the time that we end at 10:15, we will answer offline and happy to follow up via email. The webinar is being recorded and the link to the video will be emailed to those who registered by the end of the day tomorrow. I also want to take a brief moment to thank our members and our supporters and our board of directors who enabled us to bring you this webinar today. Since the pandemic, we have been able to bring you some of the very best thinking about how to navigate these challenging times. If you are a member and your membership is up for renewal, I hope you will consider renewing. And if you're not yet a member and find value in this webinar, I hope you consider joining us. Make sure you signed up to receive the latest information affecting our sector through our newsletter and our resources. You can sign up to be on our mailing list if you're not already on there at our homepage at cnpe.org. Now I'm happy to introduce Liz Hack. Liz brings more than 15 years of experience in marketing, sales, and fundraising. Her years of experience in sponsorship sales and event logistics, social event and business conferences, virtual or face-to-face, have supported an increase in donations and donor retention. She's a graduate of WKU and holds her CFRM from the Lilly School of Fundraising. She has served on several boards and committees and is a Girl Scout leader. So thank you, Liz, for being with us today. And I'll go ahead and turn the controls over to you.
Thanks, Merv. Thank you so much, CNPE, for having me today. And thank you guys for being here with me. Like previously said, my name is Liz Hack, and today I'm going to be covering sponsorships for events, conferences, trade shows, and everything else in between. You know, revenue streams for nonprofits and the like don't have a huge need to be innovative right now. Just because most people aren't meeting in person doesn't mean we can't gain and retain sponsorships for your events. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, like Merv said, this is interactive. So if you have a question, put it in the comments. I'd like for it to be a discussion so it can be as helpful to you as possible. But quickly, a little background on me. There we go. I work as the managing partner of Griffin Fundraising and Marketing, or GFNM, a company that has been working with nonprofits on capital and annual campaigns and events, including sponsorship programming, for 25 plus years. We are a boutique firm located in Louisville with expertise in working with small to medium-sized nonprofits. When working on a capital campaign, you know, it's really important to attract new donors. So innovation and creativity with events, asking, marketing is our common practice. We also, sorry guys. We also work in nonprofit and for-profit organizations on sponsorship programming. So examples for both nonprofit and for-profit are in the sponsorship programs are when we worked with the National Senior Games, and more recently with a for-profit small company here in Louisville called Sierra Interactive. I'm also the host of a new podcast called Small Shop Fundraising, and I speak with nonprofits and their supporters about topics and issues facing small to medium-sized nonprofits today. 4 of my episodes have been focused squarely on virtual events during the pandemic, and that includes sponsorship programs. You can find it pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts except for iTunes. I can't figure out how to get my podcast on iTunes. If anybody knows how to do that, I'd love to know. We can talk offline. Lastly, I am, with my husband, the co-owner and founder of a real estate conference called Real Estate Distilled. We started it in 2018, and we've hosted our 3rd annual conference just this year. We slipped it in right before the pandemic shut down the state of Kentucky, pretty much. Distill is a national conference held in Louisville aimed at residential real estate agents, team leaders, and brokers. The 2-day event highlights technology, sales, and marketing, and concepts, all while allowing attendees to network and learn from each other and the national lineup of speakers that we host each year. We also lean into the Kentucky bourbon theme, or as the mayor likes to call it, bourbonism, and make it part of our brand. We've grown the conference every year by at least 20%, and this year, 50% of our budget was earned through sponsorship. Most of the examples that you'll see today and all of the tools will be used is what I used from this conference. So what about you? This is the part where I want to learn more about why you're here and what brought you to this exact webinar. Is it because of an upcoming event? Are you planning a conference? Maybe you've got a gala in February. Comment in the chat and let us know and share with the group why you're here. I'd love to be able to speak more directly to your needs. Also, I have a short agenda on what I'd like to cover today. I like to start most of my presentations with national research and what I've learned from other webinars and online conferences. We'll talk about where to start with sponsors, creating a sponsorship program, your sponsorship tools, tips for landing that sponsor, proposals, contracts, and lastly, but certainly not least, stewardship of your sponsors. All right, so here is some national data. I attended an online conference for event professionals just a couple weeks ago, and they did a survey with over 1,000 event professionals back in March. And this slide represents how the professionals pivoted in the first month of the event. I think especially the middle portion represents just the high level of optimism the event industry had for everything returning back to normal, at least by the fall. Well, as we know now, things aren't going to go back to normal by the fall, and more and more the national scene for event professionals is looking more like Q1 of 2021 is when we're most likely to get back to normal, whatever that normal looks like. But before we move on, Murph, can you launch the poll? I'd like to see what you all did with your last in-person event. Did you cancel it? Did you postpone it or pivot? Let's see what the group consensus is to see if it follows the national trends. And while you're doing that, excuse me, I'll move on to this next slide about research. Come on, technology. Okay. In June, a survey went out to the same group of people. And as you can see, the biggest obstacle facing events resuming back to normal is basically safety, concern for the safety of attendees and stakeholders. So really, there was an overwhelming urge for a vaccine to be part of resuming back to normal. And I think that kind of goes in line with, what most people would like to see in order to get back into small, medium, and even very large event groups. All right, even going a little bit deeper into sponsorship information, I took some information that IEG, one of the largest sponsorship companies in the country, had about a survey they did. Now, if you don't know who IEG is, they are a sponsorship company that works specifically with sports and entertainment. Like I said, they did a recent survey with American consumers, and consumers are saying that brands need to connect with them in real life in order to stay socially relevant. And that's tough during a time of being socially distant in a pandemic. But it's because of the pandemic and social and racial injustice that brands are more or less forced to focus on locally based, community-driven programs and properties. They can accomplish a lot by partnering with causes like you. This is the time for nonprofits to get innovative and connect with these companies, these brands, to support them now and potentially in the future. Before we get into even more of the conference, I want to make sure of the webinar, I want to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same playing field. So I wanted to define the difference between what a donation is and what a sponsorship is. Donations, like most of you know, are donations of time, talent, and treasure, right? Money, goods, or time. You can get, and you're supposed to really not get anything in return except for its own reward. And I think that's very true. Individuals, foundations, corporations will all have a budget or an interest in giving a donation to nonprofits. And it can be a gift that is one time or reoccurring. It could be a small gift, a large gift. It could be lots of different gift types. But if we look at sponsorships are more of an exchange for something, usually money for services, right? And those same groups can also have give sponsorships, right? So, but if you look at a corporate setting, you may find that sponsorship dollars come from a different budget. You may find that a corporation has a community development budget as well as a marketing budget where those sponsorship dollars may come from. And so if you can show a return on their sponsorship investment, you may be able to find that a deeper relationship and an opportunity for two different budgets and two different ways to interact with your organization may constitute, may allow you for, more opportunities within that company. By the way, the IRS has some ideas for what tax-exempt organizations and what constitutes advertising versus qualified sponsorship payments. So I have the link here for you to check that out. And while there are a lot of differences, there are quite a few similarities as well. The need to be innovative and engage your donors and sponsors is at a high level right now. You also need to sponsor both, to steward both, both your donor and your sponsor year round. So those are two things that companies or nonprofits need to really continue to think through as we're going through this historic time in our country. Stewardship and innovation. Okay. So let's talk about sponsorships. Where do we start? How do you get one? Well, I can tell you where I started with Real Estate Distilled and some of the other programming that I've done throughout the years with other nonprofits for gaining and retaining sponsors. And for me, it should come as no surprise that I started with a budget. And that was for an in-person event and in a virtual setting. This helps guide the process of on what revenue is needed for the event. In pre-pandemic days, this meant rental expenses, F&B expenses, and in other person needs. Virtually, this could mean specialty apps, marketing, speaker expenses, postage, and still printed marketing materials. But another thing that I wanted to make sure I mentioned that nonprofits and other properties should consider is the event goals. And quantitatively, that could mean how many attendees do you want? How many sponsors do you need to have? The number of speakers, the number or percentage of engagement on your social media. What does all that look like? So you can set a bar year over year for growth. Also consider and budget for the amount of money you would like to raise from the event. And be specific as to what the funding will be going towards when speaking to your different audience types within your larger audience group. Is it a scholarship fund? Are you going to build 2 more houses for the homeless because of this event? Or is it going to help keep costs low for conference attendees so that they are able to attend? This was our why for Real Estate Distilled. Our audience includes many agents who are not associated with those big name brokerages that you've heard of, probably like RE/MAX. So they are looking for educational opportunities that are within their professional development budget. So we had to think of different ways to make it cost not be a barrier, and allow them to get to the conference so that they could provide and get involved with Real Estate Distilled. And we did that through our sponsorship program. That was our why for the sponsor program. And your organization's audience should also be thought about when preparing to engage in a sponsorship program. Who is engaging with your nonprofit? What's their age? What's their gender? Where do they live? What do they do? What kind of income do they have, if you know that? What other things might they be interested in besides volunteering for your organization or donating to your organization? And you can gather a lot of this information on your analytics through your Facebook page or your website. You also probably have some of this information in your donor database. So it's really important to help your potential sponsors know who is listening to you, right? They can then understand if you have like audiences with them, which will help make the decision easier for them to be part of your event. For example, with Real Estate Distilled, our audience is a residential real estate agents, mainly in the Southwest. Who else might be interested in this audience? Perhaps a title company or a bank that mainly services the Southeast region. Your event or conference audience might be a local resident, mainly in a certain zip code. Perhaps there's a real estate company that likes to sell homes in that particular zip code. That similar audience provides a potential link to partners through the event. All right. So you've reasoned out your expenses and your goals. And with your goals, you have created your why, or your case for support for your goals. Now let's look at the sponsorship package. This is your sales tool. This is how the event can provide opportunities for partnerships, exposure, recognition, brand awareness. The list goes on and on. So be creative here. And don't worry about the logistics of accomplishing it. Just think about what your sponsors would want or what they've asked for before if you've had sponsors in the past. Think about ways you could provide year-round exposure. maybe exposure leading up in the months and weeks before the event or even after your event. Maybe even ask your sponsor or potential sponsor what they would like to see in a sponsorship package. So what ways have you recognized or provided benefits to your sponsors? I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that. And if you'd like, comment in the chat box. Some ideas that can transfer well that we've used to provide to your sponsors is in a virtual setting, are provide opening and closing remarks to your conference or event, speaking opportunities to provide marketing materials, recognition in your newsletter, do a pre-event webinar or podcast with your sponsor. Maybe even create a video with them and post it on your Facebook page. Another thing that we did to promote scholarships is a contest that was presented by that particular sponsor. There's lots of different ways that you can transfer into the virtual world if that is what you're wanting to do. The second phase is when you think through if you can logistically get those benefits and recognition accomplished. And this is when you may need to go ask permission from your leadership or board members. Maybe you even need to get permission from your program group, depending on what the recognition level is. That's when you connect the dots to make sure you can make it happen for your sponsor. Setting your sponsorship levels, it's very tricky. I'll be honest. It's something that I'm always tweaking. You have to consider your total budget and the sponsorship goals as to where you start and end your levels. What your sponsors are willing and able to invest into the event is also a question to ask yourself. This is when you can do your research, though, and see what your potential sponsors are willing or have done in the past. You have to think about the spacing that makes sense between your levels. So if you started at $100, would it make sense to have your next level at 125 or 150? I don't know, something to consider. What are your expenses for the benefits and recognition? For example, if you have a t-shirt that you want to be part of your sponsorship recognition package, what are those expenses? And is that going to be covered in the cost of the sponsorship level? So I'm going to stop real quick and see if there's any questions. I have a tendency to go pretty fast, so I'm happy to talk through anything. Merv, are there any questions?
There aren't any right now, but folks, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. I will take maybe a quick minute, Liz, just to share the poll results from earlier. It looks like pivot to virtual, followed by postpone it and cancel was how folks seem to handle the last in-person event. So.
Yeah. It seems pretty close to what national groups were doing back in March. But I do think people are getting more comfortable with the virtual event. So that's good to see folks looking at virtual programming.
Great.
All right. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'll keep moving. So once you've thought through all the above information, you'll have content for a sponsorship deck. The sponsorship deck should provide a snapshot of the event, the attendees, all the investment levels, frequently asked questions, and most importantly, in my opinion, next steps for getting involved with the event or conference. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes and what to do next. So I have a couple of more slides that show the inside of what we did in this was a 17-page document. We have a what to expect that is relevant to the sponsor. I have an example of our audience and who our attendees are. There's a pretty healthy mix of local to out-of-towners who come to the conference every year. And this is the example of our top level, our platinum level investment, which I like to sell first to put what I call the big rocks in. How many levels should you have? Well, that's a good question. Well, make sure you have any and all companies. Make sure all companies can find their place in your sponsorship deck. First-time sponsors may want an entry-level type of investment, while others who know your audience and realize the potential of being the only sponsor from their industry allowed to sponsor the event may have a different interest in maybe a higher level sponsorship. Exclusivity is a high value benefit. This year we had 7 different levels, and which is up from six levels in the previous years. So we're all, like I said, we're always kind of tweaking and talking to our sponsors about what makes sense for them. And we talked to our sponsors this year using a sponsorship matrix. This sponsor matrix is a 1-page snapshot of all of your investment levels. I use this to specifically review with past sponsors to get their advice on my newly modified sponsor matrix. And I asked for their feedback. This is another great strategy for retaining sponsors year over year. Treat them as your advisors, because really that's what they are, and including them on decision making. Earlier, I talked about a need for year-round recognition opportunities. And some of you may be wondering why that's important. If you remember up in the IEG slide, I talked about good value for money invested. Year-round recognition is one way to create high quality value for the money your sponsors are investing in your event. It provides for an opportunity to create deeper relationships with the sponsor, thus creating opportunities for volunteerism with your organization, as well as other engagement opportunities. And if a company is heavily engaged with you, it can lead to trust building and retainment. And speaking of timeline, the timeline for an in-person event versus a virtual one can be very different, even from one organization to another. I think we all know of events that have started planning the day after their event ended for next year. I've also heard of some online events being planned in 8 weeks. When I interviewed the Home of the Innocents for small shop fundraising, they made their decision to pivot their 1,100 person in-person event to an online event in April, and then they had their event in June. What I've outlined in this slide is pretty conservative, in my opinion. Okay. So you've got your budget, your goals, you've created your why or your case for support. You've got your sponsorship deck and your matrix for your sales tools. Who should you approach to be a sponsor? For Real Estate Distilled, we've always approached companies and organizations who are like-minded in their approach to real estate and education. There's an interest in that education process for all involved, and relationship building through partnership. Finding groups with like-minded values and goals creates a win-win culture for both parties. A willingness to support one another is a willingness to support one another as you strive for similar goals is really what I call with a rising tide, all ships will sail mentality. I've also leaned into some tried and true tactics for prospecting sponsors: linkage, interest, and awareness/ability. Is the organization, your nonprofit, or someone in your nonprofit linked to a potential sponsor? Do their goals and values align with the organization and mission of the event? Is there an interest in such a partnership? And are they aware of the organization/event? And do they have the ability to get involved monetarily? Remember the example from Real Estate Distilled about title companies having linkage and interest to be part of the conference and having a like audience to build on that partnership? That's exactly what this linkage, interest, and awareness prospecting tool can help you with, finding those like audiences and those ones that are linked to you. But where could you look for sponsors? Are there company leaders sitting on your board or volunteering in other capacities with your organization? Once you have a sponsor or a potential sponsor in mind, research them. Look at what they've sponsored before and how they were recognized. Other sponsors may want to be associated with your lead sponsor. And to be associated with the lead sponsor attracts them to your event sponsorship opportunities. There's lots of different reasons why people get involved with events. And those are just a few of them. So when in Rome, we had a great success with touring potential sponsors through our conference. It worked pretty well. And this way they got a good feel for the community that's been created by the conference and the professionalism and attention to detail that's been taken to plan everything out. It's been pretty successful. In 2018, we toured a potential sponsor, and that sponsor has been back in 19 and 20. And we toured another person in 20, and we're hoping that they will be with us in 2021. Okay, so there's been a yes, or almost a yes. I like to send out a proposal. I've seen them done many different ways, like using the investment matrix that we saw earlier, the one-page snapshot of all the investment levels, and just placing a check mark by one of them and adding a signature line to that one-page document. I like to include a little bit more information because it is another touch point to your sponsor or potential sponsor. The proposal that I like to include has a date. The proposal is specific to the potential sponsor. And there's a summary of the case for support, or the why, again, and a summary of what the event will look like relevant to the sponsor. I also add the investment level or the 2 investment levels that the sponsor is looking at. And we've learned that through conversation with the sponsor so that they can compare and contrast the 2 different ones. After the proposal, I also provide a letter of understanding when the decisions have been made and make it official. I send a letter for both parties to sign and keep on file. This way, everyone is clear what each are responsible for. This is where I also add a payment schedule if the sponsor has asked for that. And all payments are due before or during the event. This is also where the sponsors add invoicing information, or sometimes they even just use this letter of understanding as the invoice. I've had that happen several times. Okay, stewardship of sponsors. Like I said earlier, stewardship of a sponsor is just as important as with a donor. We do this a number of ways. We send a handwritten thank you at the end of the event, and during the event, we provide thank you gifts that connect back to Louisville in some way. So 2 years ago, we gave out those miniature Louisville Slugger bats. with the name of the and the name of the year of the conference, and those went over really well. And this year we provided bourbon balls from a local vendor, um, art edibles. We provided all these to all of our speakers and sponsors as just a way to say thank you for being here. We appreciate everything you've done to make this happen for us, for the attendees, for the speakers, and for you. To transfer this to a virtual world, you can do something similar through delivery services. You can even send a gift card via Facebook. I've done that several times. Customer service or stewardship for sponsors and going above and beyond are two things to consider when wanting to retain your sponsor year over year. So this is an example of something we've created for going above and beyond. This is a promotional support flyer that one of our sponsors asked for when one of our sponsors asked for some help on promoting the conference to his sphere of influence. It was something easy and general to make and then customize to each of our sponsors as they came on board. This promotional flyer wasn't required for us to do. It wasn't in the benefits package. Instead, it was a way to help our sponsors promote the event without the headache of having to make the time to create something and send it out. We wanted to take the pain point away from them. Our sponsors appreciated it. They appreciated the extra effort, and we plan to use this strategy again in 2021. This piece was created to be printed out or attached to an email, but this same type of promotional support can be created for an Insta post or on LinkedIn. My point is to make it easy for your sponsors to gush about sponsoring and partnering with you. That way everybody wins. Another way we try to go above and beyond is providing a wrap-up report. At the end of the year, at the end of the event, we perform an online survey that is sent out to anyone who attended the event. We ask for quantitative and qualitative data, and other ways that we keep track of our audience is keeping track of our newsletter subscribers, website visitors, Facebook group members, and other data points relevant to the sponsor. We provide all of that data back to our sponsors in what we call a wrap-up report. They like to see that attendees are getting something valuable from what they're sponsoring and what they're providing as a sponsor. It can help them better their marketing to like audiences. They also like to see that they are supporting a growing and trusted brand. And that is who they want to be associated with, someone who is growing and someone who is trusted within their communities. This wrap-up report serves as a good reason to reach back out to sponsors after the event to gather feedback from them and talk about continuing the relationship for the next opportunity, another way to retain sponsors. And I hope, just as a review, this is getting close to the end of our time together. And I feel like I think we covered everything that we talked about wanting to cover for our time. I would be happy to take some questions now. I feel if I've gone too fast, so we can go back over some other things. I'm happy to do that.
Great, thank you, Liz. So yes, folks, if you have any questions for Liz about anything that she presented, please let us know in the Q&A box, and we'd be more than happy to ask them. If you want to go over some other stuff that she talked about as she shares the review, bullet points, let us know, and we'll be happy to ask them. So while we're waiting on questions, I do actually have a question, Liz, maybe to help us get started. So how much time should folks spend on nurturing current sponsors versus trying to recruit new ones? And then how much time should one spend um, moving current sponsors to a different level? Um, what are your thoughts on that? Just curious.
Sure. So with your first question, how much time should you spend with new with your current sponsors versus new sponsors? You know, with donors, uh, there's a lot of research around retaining sponsors is uh, usually something that people want to do because it's less expensive and less timely for nonprofits to do than getting new donors. And I would say the same goes for sponsorship. You want to spend time nurturing and providing opportunities for those sponsors to be in front of your audience throughout the year. And you can set that schedule with them and that expectation with them in your year-round recognition and benefits portion of your sponsorship package. So for example, Real Estate Distilled has a speaker library that we started probably in 2019. And we have allowed certain sponsors to be recognized as the speaker library presenter for a certain year or a certain speaker of 2019 or 2020. And so that gets them in front of those potential audience folks who are looking at those speakers online. We also do webinars and ways in which they can communicate with our community online in our Facebook group, which is something that is very high value for those sponsors as they try to link with potential clients and customers. With attaining new sponsors, I would say that's going to take a little bit more time to find those folks. But I would go ahead and ask those people who are already involved with your organization. We have done that similarly with our top sponsor for Real Estate Distilled and who they would like to see at those events as they grow their company with regard to their partners, their integration communities that would be helpful for them as they grow their relationships, not only with Real Estate Distilled, but also with the community that they are involved with as they grow their business. And what was the second question, Merv? I'm sorry.
Moving sponsors from lower tier,
right.
lower level up to a higher one.
Yeah. And we get a lot of questions about that with regard to Real Estate Distilled. You know, there are certain benefits and recognition opportunities that are higher level than they want to invest in. And we just have that back and forth conversation about what is important to them. What would make this event more of a win-win for them? Would it be an opportunity to be online because their services are online? So maybe that doesn't mean they need an in-person opportunity to get in front of these folks and talk about their company or do a presentation on some topic. Maybe that means that they're in our Facebook group or they're on our LinkedIn page talking to that audience member, linking them to their online services. So we talk about what makes the most sense for them. And if it's because of a cash flow issue, then that's when the payment schedule comes into place. And we can talk through different ways. And if this is, obviously you have to get buy-in and agreement from the leadership of your organization. But putting them on a payment schedule throughout the year, which means you have to start kind of early for them so that they can pay, every month, every 3 months, or whatever the payment schedule may be, so that they can have that higher level sponsorship opportunity, so they can get that recognition that they know works for their services and their audiences. and everybody has a win-win without changing terribly your sponsorship levels to customize something that would be difficult to track and potentially unfair to other sponsors.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple of questions here, but I have actually a quick follow-up to that. So, well, what are your thoughts about like switching benefits? So, like, say a sponsor has, is in this tier, but really likes one or two aspects of a higher level tier or something. Is there room for negotiation with the sponsors?
Yes, there's always room for negotiation. And I think, it might also depend on the type of industry you're in. You might want to have a sponsorship policy put in place, much like your donation policy procedures for what types of donations you'll take. You also might want to have a group consensus that has been approved by the board or approved by your fundraising committee or whomever to set policies on what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. So, ABC company doesn't come to their buddy who's on the board and says, hey, can you get me this whole package for $50 instead of, $100. You can look to those policies and have some sort of constant through your sponsorship levels, so that it is more of a common ground kind of thing. But yes, there's always room for negotiation. It just depends on what the negotiation is.
Great, thank you. All right, so we do have a couple of questions that come through. First is in the Q&A box, what if you're just starting out and you lack confidence in the value you are offering sponsors for exposing them to your audience? What are your tips or tricks for that?
So I completely understand where you're coming from. Thank you for the question. I think, with anything, you have to test it. And if you're not confident in it, then it's going to come through in your presentation. So you really need to believe in the content that you've created and the value that you have to share with your audiences, and then let that shine through. If you believe, like I know there's some, I think there's some Girl Scout folks on, and since I'm a Girl Scout leader, I understand that. If you believe in the leadership and the development of girls and the skills that go along with that, then lead with that. Lead with what your passion is. Also, if it makes you more comfortable to bring someone along who is more comfortable asking for sponsorship money or asking for the donation or the sponsorship agreement. I also like to start with the people who I know the best and who I'm most comfortable with. So it might not be it's always our top sponsor that we start with, because we have a great relationship with those people, with that organization, and they tell us like it is. They tell us what they need and what they don't need. And we also have some other smaller companies that aren't at the same level, excuse me, or even at the second highest level, but they too will be open and honest with us. So we like to start with people we have the best relationships with. So those are some of my tried and true tricks. Be confident in your content. Know it's the best content that you can provide, and some of the best content out there for whatever you've got going on at your event. And then start with the people who you're most comfortable with to help maybe work out the kinks and get the your soft opening kind of thing hammered out, so that when you go to those folks that you don't know as well, you have your spiel ready.
Great.
Any other questions?
Yes. So we've got one more here. Tips on approaching potential donors, especially if you have to cold call folks. Who do you contact at the business, and what's the best way to get your foot in the door?
Okay. Well, again, that kind of depends on the size of the business and the where the business is located. But I would suggest going through. I don't like to start with cold calling, but if you have to do it, you're going to get a lot of no's. Okay, so just be prepared for that. In my opinion, that's what's going to happen, right? So these people don't know you from the next person over, And I'm assuming there's not been any volunteer opportunities with groups from that company. I'm assuming that they've never been to an event. I'm assuming they've never given to your organization ever. There's no connectivity from the board, your board of directors, or anybody at your company, and you're just cold calling, a coffee store to see if they'd be willing to provide coffee for your next event. I would go and see and research what it is that they like to give to. Speaking of coffee, there's a local place that has in the past liked to give to organizations, um, not so much financially, but in kind, with maybe budget relieving opportunities like coffee. And so maybe you start with that. Start with what they are comfortable with giving. And so I would do your research there and see if there's ways that you can find out what they like to be part of, what they like to be associated with, what audiences are similar to who is interested in your nonprofit or your event, and go from there. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
Yeah, if it doesn't, please feel free to follow up, Max, with that.
Yes.
You mentioned the board. How much should you lean on your board to help you connect and network for sponsorships?
Well, it's hard to say. If you're a working board and you have the approval of your executive director or your top leadership to reach out to those folks, I'd say as much as they would allow you to, but set that expectation up front. If they are connected to potential companies that would find value in being part of your event, then ask them. You never know who will be willing to support you or connect you with other folks unless you ask. And that's the number one reason people don't invest in nonprofits, either through sponsorship or through donations, is that they weren't ever asked. And so asking can be intimidating, but if you, like I said, if you believe in your content and you believe in the mission that you're trying, your why, like we talked about the why of the event, then it's a little easier because you want to onboard people who are similar in their approach to to sponsorship and to your community. So I would lean on your board as much as your nonprofit team, your executive leadership team, and that person is willing to let you lean on them.
So there was actually a follow-up from that last question. Dollars, instead of coffee, do you have a sense of specific departments that folks can reach out to when we call it marketing departments?
Sure. So sometimes it's within their marketing department, and sometimes you can reach out to their marketing people specifically. You can also reach out to HR. A lot of times HR is in charge for some reason of of sponsorship and fundraising dollars. So that's a good place to also reach out to. Other than that, with small to medium-sized businesses, a lot of times it's right at the top, the owner. Many of our I'm thinking through the companies that we have. Many of our companies that we have on board for the Real Estate Distilled conference, we spoke directly to the owner. It's not like a Humana that we have sponsoring. It's more of those medium-sized companies who the owner is the marketing department, or the owner is the main salesperson, for example. So
Great.
that's who I would go to.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And there are also some organizations have community development.
Yeah,
I believe, right? So they're
many banks do. Yeah.
have someone or who actually is tending to that work, or is part of that work. And it could be under marketing, but I know that some like I think Brown Forman has some specific department dedicated to just kind of community support.
Right. Right. Yeah. Some of the larger, more developed organizations like Brown Forman, like Republic Bank, like PNC, they have community development committees, or they have community development departments. And so those committees might meet quarterly for sponsorship and donations, capital gifts, for example, or sponsorship opportunities that are, I think for Republic, it's 5,000 and under. Yes, there are lots of different ways that larger, more developed companies have leading and guiding their sponsorship and donation programs.
So actually, speaking of Brown Forman, we did have another question that just came through. So like I said, when I go to large events, there are beverage sponsors like Brown Forman. How do I get a foot in the door with these companies when you don't have a well-connected board? Is that a matter of cold calling again? Or?
Yeah, with Brown Forman specifically, they like to see people from their organization on some kind of committee or your board, especially if you're applying for a grant through their granting process. And they also like to build a relation. If we're talking specifically about Brown Forman, they like to see that relationship build. And it may take a couple of times for them to decide to give to your cause and to your event. So, I would just call over there or send an email, invite them to a virtual coffee or however they're engaging with folks, and see if they have heard of you or would like to learn more about you, and start the relationship. I was listening, I'm a part of AFP, and I was listening to Walter Woods talk about relationship building with nonprofits. Walter Woods is over at Humana, and he gave a great piece of advice that sometimes it's hard to follow, and that is, build a relationship with these potential grant makers and funders, and then ask for the investment or the dollar, monetarily gift. And that is sometimes hard to do because you're under the gun. You have these goals that you want to hit. You have this budget that potentially keeps growing, and that is hard to do. So you have to start early, and that's why in the timeline that I provided between in-person and virtual events, there is a 9-month to a year process for in-person events. There is a 5-month to 9-month opportunity for growing your virtual event. So, because those sponsors do need a relationship to be built and a reason to give. And so it does take some time to start, and it may start with smaller gifts first. And as you work up that trust and build that relationship, to then show them that you are a trusted brand that will, manage their investment fairly. Does that help answer that follow-up question, Murph?
Yes, it does. And it kind of reminds me of that old adage, right? Ask for money, get advice, ask for advice, and you're most likely that will eventually lead to money down the road. So great. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Liz, first for sharing your thoughts, knowledge, and expertise with us today. And for those of you on the call and the webinar, thank you for joining us today. I will send you all a link to the recording of the session so you can replay and review any of the content again. If you don't see my email by the end of the day tomorrow, please check your spam folder. If you still don't see it, please drop me a line and I'll be happy to resend it. We will also send you a link to an online feedback form, so if you take a couple of minutes to fill that out, we greatly appreciate it. Finally, we have a few more webinars coming up. Next week, we'll just have a general information session on accessing telehealth. And in September, we have the last of our grant writing boot camp with Jason Atkins. So if you can find more information about that, and you can register directly on our events page at cnpe.org. So on behalf of us here at CNPE, thank you again for joining us today. Thank you again, Liz. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
And we'll
Thank
see
you,
you all
CNPE.
again.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to me one-on-one. I'm happy to go over anything with anyone today.
Appreciate that. All right. Thank you, Liz. Thank you again, everyone.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.